Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you are watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I don't know if any of you know me outside of YouTube, but if you do, and if you don't, that's fine. But some of you probably know that I am a person who believes in tradition. And I like to carry on things that I personally enjoy, even if it is only one time a year. So I am very happy to have my friend Gabby back for the third time over here to discuss.
Wild that this is the
Yeah,
third time.
third time. Isn't it unbelievable? As a matter of fact, Gabby, I just recently watched the video that we did back on my channel when we talked about the first COVID situation, when we all
Yeah.
like talking about how we're creating content during the pandemic. So it was very interesting to visit that, and more importantly, reminded myself how I always have a great conversation whenever you're around.
Yeah.
That's the most
Thank
important
you
thing.
so much for having me back. I know I've kind of disappeared from YouTube a little bit because so much has changed since that first video that we recorded. I've graduated college. I've started a full-time job, which I'm so busy over there creating content because I'm doing more magazine things now,
That's
using my
great.
journalism degree and putting it to good use. But I am over on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Gabby Marie Edits. If anyone wants to follow and see what adventures I'm up to, because I like talking about all the nerdy and geeky stuff that I'm up to over there.
That's
So
awesome. I'll
trying.
remind myself to talk to you about this after the show so I can get the link posted.
Yeah.
So she is back tonight to talk another round of MCU films. Tonight we're going to be discussing Phase 5 Part 1. Clearly all the stuff that came out in 2023. And before we get into this past year, I think we are going to have a very interesting conversation because I want to bring us all back to before the pandemic. Imagine it being 2018 and 2019, and we're all anticipating two of the biggest installments of the MCU. And that, of course, is Avengers Infinity War, followed by Avengers Endgame, with Captain Marvel thrown in there in between. It was a different time. It was a very amazing time as people who had never read a comic book from Marvel or DC, seeing what could possibly be done in cinema and seeing the genius that started at the time, going on 11 years back in 2008 with the very first Iron Man, what cinema could truly do. So this was a time whenever there was a Marvel movie coming to theaters, it didn't matter how good or how bad it was at the end. We all were just satisfied, excited about the fact that we saw it, extremely excited for what was next because of the post-credit scene that we get. And Gabby, I gotta tell you, it was a glorious time. It really was
Yeah.
something special.
And I think that's because, like, when you think about Marvel's release schedule, like now versus then, you only got like one or two movies a year. And now you're getting, like, even I think in 2023, we have like 6 releases to discuss between films and TV. And so it's just so much more content. And, you know, talking about like even post pandemic, like people are starting to get back to their normal lives now and have a lot more going on. So the keeping up with the content and the pacing of everything is just a lot. And so it's definitely, yeah, been such a change and such a difference between like getting 1 or 2 films a year and being really, really excited and really looking forward to them, especially when there's such big movies that were putting a cap on the MCU where it started with Iron Man. And now it's sort of like, where do you go from there after doing something as big as like Infinity War and Endgame were with these major, major crossovers and trying to find a way to top that. And I think Marvel's been struggling a little bit to figure out where to go next and how to sort of keep the characters that have sort of been with them for a while and wrap up some of their stories that didn't get wrapped up, bring in new characters. And it's kind of been, I think, a little bit all over the place, but it's been interesting to sort of see what direction they've been going in. And definitely, yeah, just completely different. And I
Yeah.
think just the schedule is a large part of that, how much more they're releasing now versus then.
As someone like myself, who read comic books as a kid, who's now very much invested in comics again, it's impossible to stop with a place like Avengers Endgame because there's still a much larger world. Because we know what things were doing in terms of film industries as a business. We knew that Marvel had their properties at Fox, at Sony, and the fact that they had actually managed to get Spider-Man into the MCU because there's nothing wrong with movie companies willing to share. I mean, I never understood the concept of why they hesitated to do that, but knowing that we still had so many more stories in the legacy of Marvel Comics, knowing that there were still characters that needed to be a part of this storyline, it was it was impossible for the MCU to just stop after
Right.
Avengers Endgame. So
I'm
it
with you
all,
when you're at the peak of your success too, because Endgame was such a big deal. You want to capitalize on that and you want to keep that momentum going.
especially considering the fact that DC was still trying so hard to catch up. So Marvel was definitely thinking that they needed to take it to another level. So they introduced the whole original TV shows, and I still to this day still believe that we all caught Kevin Feige's lie when he said that you didn't need to watch the television shows to understand what's going on in the movies. And
Yeah, that's not true anymore.
yeah, we're going to get into that a lot tonight. That is for certain.
Yeah.
But that made a lot of sense to go in the direction that they were going. And then, of course, when the pandemic happened, it made even more sense. But I remember when you and I were talking about that Phase 4 into Phase 5 sizzle reel when they were finally starting to open movie theaters back up again. So we were excited to see Black Widow. We were excited to see Shang-Chi, even though some of these characters were characters that some of us didn't even know, or we knew, but we really didn't even get invested in the comics, especially when the TV shows were coming out with Moon Knight and She-Hulk and all of that. We were excited. But then the big question was, what were we going to get? And I'm not going to say that Phase 4, I mean, I still think that a lot of people are a little over exaggerated when it comes to how bad Phase 4 was to them, because I personally did find movies like Shang-Chi, and even I will take this to my grave. I enjoyed the Eternals very much. I really, really did. And maybe that's just because of the fact that I understood what the movie was trying to bring us.
Mhm.
But the point that I'm making here is that we're now at a point where there's been a lot more negativity towards not just Marvel films, but comic book films in general. Because DC is in dire straits at this point in time. We're not going to talk about what's going on with the company itself or even what's going on with the higher ups at Warner Brothers. Forget about that. But I take a look back at this past year, and as someone who has been on board with these film adaptations of Marvel characters, it's really hard for me to look at myself and say, I'm not so keen on this anymore. It really is upsetting to me personally, as someone who truly loves these worlds and these stories and these characters.
Yeah, I completely get it. And I think another thing that, would be remiss to not mention is the SAG after strike and the WGA strike that happened, because that also played a huge role with Marvel as well. And I think them sort of rethinking how they run some of their television shows and what it is that they're doing over there. Because I know at the time they were working on Daredevil, and I think they had like half of the show finished and then they had to scrap it and then completely went and like scrapped, I think, who was on their team and had to completely rework that. So I think that also has played a role as well in things that have been going on over at Marvel and the MCU. And so I think there's just been, it's been definitely a very tumultuous time, I think, in the world in terms of what's going on. I think that also plays a role in cinema and in the movies that we create. And I think that's something I firmly and wholeheartedly believe in is, um, I know someone who would, I guess, would consider myself an entertainment journalist, um, that the world around us very much impacts the media that we see and how it's shaped and how it's created and how those stories are told and what's going on behind the scenes in the creating of those stories. And so I think that's also important to mention. But yeah, I think a lot of people are getting burned out on Marvel and just on the superhero stories in general because there's just been such a push of them. And I know you have like the Martin Scorsese's and a lot of the other people who will like beat down on superhero movies. And I think that's not right either. I think there can be like a common ground between like, enjoying, indie films or enjoying like I don't know, stuff like that that just doesn't fit into like the blockbuster superhero movies, like enjoying and appreciating those types of films, and also, enjoying a superhero movie because there's takeaway from those stories as well. But I do definitely think that there is a sort of collective burnout that's been happening overall with the superhero movies and trying to sort of figure out how to get audiences invested in them again and to appreciate those stories, because I think the tide is sort of turning away from superhero movies a little bit. And people are getting a lot more excited, I think, about the standalone films, and you're seeing a lot more love, I feel like, towards those, which is interesting.
Bravo, well said. No, I agree with you. I mean, it's just like I feel that truly artistic films and mindless blockbuster films can clearly live in harmony. And last
Yeah.
year was a perfect example of that because the two biggest films were two completely different types of films, the Barbie movie and Oppenheimer. Look at
Yeah.
that. We can have these movies types coexist. It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
But I think that I also think of one of the biggest impacts of the MCU now is probably the fact that before Avengers Endgame, we did in fact lose Stan Lee. I mean, I really wonder
Yeah.
if Stan Lee was alive to see most of Phase 4 and now pretty much almost all of Phase 5 be what it was. I wonder how he'd feel about it as
Yeah.
the father of this grand company and the co-creator. I say co-creator because we can never forget the great Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, all of these wonderful minds who helped put these characters onto the original newsprint back in the 60s. And it's absolutely crazy to know that we've also, in the last 2 or 3 years, celebrated some 60th anniversaries because it was the 1960s that saw the superhero come back in a big way thanks to Stan Lee and all of those people at Marvel bringing these wonderful heroes to our eyes in the pages of comic books, as DC also creating their Silver Age of comics, bringing in Silver Age versions of characters like the Flash and Green Lantern, and revitalizing the original trio, which is of course Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. So yeah, it's just like I can look back nostalgically on those characters and those creations because that's what these films to me are all about. All these characters that I've known ever since I was a little kid, and knowing that they've been around for so many years. I mean, did you even know that this year is the 85th anniversary of Batman?
Wow. Yeah. It is amazing how much history like these characters have. And I think that's one of the things that I think makes the superhero stories just in general so powerful, is that there is a childhood nostalgia in watching them, in, wanting to be a superhero and wanting to have super abilities, and like teaching,
And
young coming of age individuals, like, to find like your own self-worth and your own self-power and to rise on your own merits. Um, and there's a lot of, really great inspiration that comes from those stories, which is why, they're not just blockbuster films. There's a lot of really great stuff that comes out of superhero movies that is very empowering.
yeah,
And I think that's one of the things that Marvel did really, really well, is take those characters who are superheroes and make them very three-dimensional.
yeah.
Um, and
Even in the world of animation, because last year we also had Spider-Man Across the
yeah,
Spider-Verse, and I didn't get a chance to see this movie, but I heard a lot of people really enjoyed the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie as well. And believe it or not, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles this year are also celebrating their 40th anniversary. So
yeah,
it's a big year for nostalgia and comic book characters. But anyway, so last year started off Phase 5. I personally was somewhat excited for where the MCU was going. And we got the very first offering from Marvel in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantimania, the third film in the Ant-Man trilogy. And I, for one, will say that I have been a fan of the Ant-Man films because I always referred to them as the breath of fresh air because the Ant-Man films seemed to show up when the MCU was at its bleakest. And I wouldn't say that that was where we were with Quantumania, but the funniest thing is, I think that Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania was a bit of a surprise because it sort of went in the opposite direction. It was not the breath of fresh air. Rather, it was the big dramatic piece because it pretty much furthered what Loki season 1 gave us and furthered the character of Kang. But it was this version, which was the comic book version that we were all, as fans, anticipating. And that, of course, was Kang the Conqueror. So I will actually say that I did somewhat enjoy the film. And I think the main reason why is it is so hard to dislike Paul Rudd in a movie.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
there was a time when Dwayne Johnson could be in any kind of movie, and it didn't matter how good or how bad the movie was, you're gonna love it until Black Adam, apparently. I saw Black Adam and I was so upset with that film. But Paul Rudd still has yet to reach that threshold in his career. He is,
Yeah,
the screen loves him. He's so charming. He knows how to work with what he's given.
absolutely.
And the fact that he is able to bring that energy to whatever project he's on, the rest of the cast follows suit. So Evangeline Lilly, you know, I didn't dislike a single person in a single actor in that movie. I mean, okay, maybe I found Cassie a little bit over the top as a teenager, and maybe that's just because of the fact that I loved her as the child in the first 2 films. But I always enjoyed this film with their characters. I always loved Michael Douglas as Hank, and to get a larger role from Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet was also somewhat exciting for me. And just to see Kang the way I was expecting him to be was also something I was looking forward to, because that was the second thing about this film that I did enjoy very much. The fact that we got a villain finally in such a long time that actually felt very dark, scary, and threatening, because we
Yes.
didn't get that much from any from a larger portion of the MCU villains. I mean, Loki, we got it. We got it from Thanos. But as far as every other villain that we had, not necessarily so much. I mean, maybe to a certain extent, Daniel Bruhl as Baron Zemo. I think that Captain America, I think that the Falcon and the Winter Soldier expanded him the way he was supposed to be. But, you know, I would have expected a little bit more from him in Civil War. But I really enjoyed Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror in this film. And the thing I really did enjoy about this film was I really did like the aesthetic. I thought it was really gorgeous and imaginative to look at.
Yeah.
I was always joking around with a couple of people that this was the better version of Disney's Strange World.
Yeah.
They looked very similar, but those were my positive thoughts. I'll get to my negatives after I hear a little bit from you as well.
Yeah, I think the cast, like Marvel, one of the things that I feel like they continually, time and time again, are successful at is putting together a really strong, well-rounded cast. And Paul Rudd is obviously one of those individuals. He just carries, and I think he's such a great choice to play Ant-Man. And I do like that this film, you know, like Ant-Man, like you said, is the breath of fresh air. It has a lot of comedic aspects to it. And I feel like this film was definitely darker, and you get to see a darker side of Ant-Man and his character, and you get to see Paul Rudd play around with that. And I was also watching his season of, I think, Only Murders in the Building around the same time, and that has a little bit of a darker tone as well. So I was like, it's great to see Paul Rudd sort of playing around in that territory and in that space, and getting to play a different take on that character. Again, Michael Douglas is great, and you know, despite everything happening, Jonathan Majors is so phenomenal as Kang. You know, I was so excited, particularly for this film, because I really loved his introduction in Loki the first season, and I was excited to get to see more of him. And I knew that this film was going to be the sort of space for that. And I thought he was a phenomenal part of this
Yeah.
film, and was also have some really great side characters as well that I really, really liked. I loved Katie M. O'Brien in the movie as well. And Corey Stoll comes back. That was,
I've got a few things to say about that whole thing with Corey Stoll.
yeah. William Jackson Harper as Quaz, that was a really, really fun. Like you had some like fun side characters that came in and just provided some comedic relief. And I always think that that's fun. And I liked some of their backstory and the way that they sort of contributed to the taking down of Kang. But I do think, yeah, we can talk about some of the downsides as well. Like I think the movie itself, it's supposed to be like this big follow up to Loki, and you're using Ant-Man, and I think it is interesting because I mean, I don't even think it's so much of an argument as much as it is a truth that like the Avengers wouldn't have succeeded without Ant-Man in Endgame. So he's suddenly this character that is playing this pivotal role now in the MCU, and so you have a film now where he has to sort of like continue to play that role and play that big major role. Um, and so it's interesting to have to give that character that responsibility when that's something that they haven't really played with a lot in the first two films.
Yeah.
But yeah, like again, I think you have a really great cast and they work really well with what they're given. But if we want to move on to sort of like the messier side of things, I think the writing and the plot was a little bit
It was
messy
a
in the
it was a bit I think the correct term would be convoluted. Like I
yeah.
didn't understand a large chunk of it. I mean, I understood what the whole purpose of the film was, but there was just so much of it that maybe it's just because of the fact that you never would have expected Ant-Man to go in the route that it went because you're so used to what Ant-Man was before.
Yeah.
The whole thing with MODOK, I personally was very, besides the fact that the special effects were horrible. I mean, I think that's another reason why a lot of the Marvel films this year suffered is because the visual effects were just so sloppy. And the part that really steams me is the fact that these movies were going into post-production long after the pandemic was done. So as far as I'm concerned, there was no excuse. I always joke, even though it's not the same kind of story, the fact that Raya and the Last Dragon was animated from the houses of all the individual animators, and they were not in an office together, and they still managed to put together a beautiful Disney
Yeah,
canon classic. I just don't understand why you just couldn't do it that way with every movie. I mean, if you have your technology in the privacy of your own home, what's stopping you from giving it a 110%? But MODOK is a character that is not at all what he was in the comics. As a matter of fact, MODOK would have made more sense in a movie like Iron Man 3, because in Iron Man 3, you were introduced to the Organization of Advanced Idea Mechanics. He's one of the leaders of that group. So
yeah.
the fact that we basically turned, and yes, you would wonder how a big floating head with T-Rex like arms and legs can be a threatening villain. Well, the truth of the matter is he is a threatening villain because he's a super genius. But clearly that was not the case in this
Yeah,
film.
they very much pared him down to be a comedic relief character,
A
and
comedic
he
relief and
wasn't
a
that intimidating
sidekick.
at all. Yeah.
That was just, to me, that was extremely demeaning. And going back to Iron Man 3, that's another reason why I didn't care for Iron Man 3, because of the whole thing that they did with Ben Kingsley and showing us that he was not the Mandarin. That was something that sort of really upset me, because again, you also have to understand that yes, I'm a fanboy. I do read a lot of the source material. I've seen the old cartoons, so sometimes I just get a little bit peeved, but I do understand the concept of changing things for the purpose of cinematic value. But for
I think
me, there are,
Marvel has been going away from the comics a lot and has been taking a lot of their own creative license with a lot of the stories they've been telling. And I think that's maybe another reason too why a lot of people are getting peeved with it, because it's not, the farther you go away from the comics, the original source material, I think you lose the heart of like why these stories are so special and why the characters are so special and why people like them so much too.
well, I could understand. Yeah, you're absolutely right, because apparently in the last couple of weeks there have been videos that have been posted all over the internet when they were interviewing like the minds behind these recent films and TV shows from the MCU, and they were saying like, we were told don't read the comics, and they kept saying I never knew about the comics. I mean, apparently Taika Waititi got so much more enemies because he announced that he never picked up a Thor comic in his life, and yet he directed 2 Thor movies.
Yeah.
And that's something that I didn't like jump on my rooftop and screamed, "Damn you, Taika Waititi!" No, I didn't do that, but I knew he never read one of those comics before. But
It's also a weird thing to say out loud and admit to. Like, I would just like, if that were
Yeah.
me and I were in a position, I would just be like, no comment, because I feel like I'm saying that out loud, because I think about like being a very avid reader. There's an actor I can think of who was in an adaptation of a book series I really, really love, and he came out and he's like, yeah, I didn't read the books. And I was like, this is why this adaptation sucks, because you don't know your characters and your source material of where like you're coming from, and that's something that peeved me off. So like thinking about it from a comic equivalent, even though I feel like, you know, there's a little bit of a difference between adapting like a book to a movie or to television versus a comic to a television, but it, you know, it is still the same. You have a source material and you have those characters, you have their identity, who they are, and you're tasked with taking that and bringing that to screen and knowing your source material and knowing things about your characters and the people who created them. It just feels like to pay respect to them and to the work that they created, if you're going to adapt it, to be familiar with the source material. So yeah, that's something you could not get me to admit out loud if that was the case. So
Yes, but
I
at the
found it.
same time, what I was getting at was when you take a look at some of the movies that were being made since the end of Endgame, a lot of these characters were also not the most popular characters. It's like that was something that a lot of people were saying. It's like, why are you dipping into the barrel for like the C's and the D's and the E's? Why don't you try and find like another A or a B? Not that saying that they couldn't be found, but when you're working with characters like Shang-Chi, or you're working with characters like Moon Knight, they're known, but there's not a fan base like, Spider-Man or the X-Men or something like that. So you have a
Right.
little bit more of a creative breathing room and wiggle room. So you have the ability to make a couple of necessary changes. I mean, again, why would we complain about that when you take a look at the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy? I mean, there
Yeah,
was a
that's
lot of
just what I was
blippies
gonna say,
there.
is that the
Yeah,
Guardians was definitely like one of those polls that did, and we have you know, one of the third Guardians films to discuss as well. So um,
absolutely. But that's what
yep.
I'm getting at. It's just like you have more creative liberty, but at the same time, you're right. You do have to pay tribute to the story and the creators. And I mean, I have so much more to say about where the MCU is going, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't have a good time with this movie. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out why in God's name Bill Murray was in the movie. I mean,
Yeah, they made like, I feel like, a big deal about him being in the movie, and then he just like came and went, and I was like, oh, all right, he was
yeah, I'm
there,
like, why are you
played his
here?
part.
But
Yeah,
I mean, let's look at the bright side. Paul Rudd and Bill Murray will be in the next Ghostbusters film, and I gotta
yes,
tell you, I'm very excited for it because I
that'll
love
be
the
fun.
last Ghostbusters movie. It was great. But
Yeah,
anyway, no, I mean, like, I think the other interesting thing about the movie was the fact that at the end of the film, Kang was killed.
yeah,
That
because I
was
wasn't
something that I
expecting
did
that.
not expect. No, especially if they were saying that an Avengers film was going to be called the Kang Dynasty. I mean, who knows if that's going to stick now? I don't know. I mean, I'm hearing rumors about replacing Jonathan Majors. They're naming some good names, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't
like, do you
know.
replace him? But I mean, like, that could be, you know, obviously we still have like he was in Loki season 2, so there's that to discuss as well. But yeah, what happened there I think is very unfortunate for Marvel. Not to tee us like too far away from the film, but I think that, you know, I heard like, do they recast him? Do they like steer away from Kang or whatever they originally had planned for him and try to work around that? Like, I feel like there's kind of, it's frustrating when you're in a cinematic universe and you're going in a certain direction, then a lot of outside elements sort of come in and then play a role, and then what the quality of the film ends up being, and it's things that you can't really control internally. I think a lot about the Fantastic Beast films, um which like those were a bit of a mess, but when you think about like the pandemic and what happened with Johnny Depp and what happened with Ezra Miller and JK Rowling, it was just like one thing after another, that like there's no way that those movies were going to be like good quality movies with everything that was happening externally. So naturally, like what you see on screen is a bit of a mess. And I feel like that's something that's sort of similar here, except I think to a lesser degree. But when you cast your person and they're supposed to be like your big bad for, you know, and for however, you know, the next chapter of Marvel, and like this is the person that you're pinning your money on to be your lead, and then that's what happens, you're kind of like, where do we go from here? And it
Yeah,
kind of puts your foundation on shaky ground, which is, you know, frustrating
and
because he's such a talented actor and like, you know, phenomenal in this and Quantimania, but also in Loki season 2. I loved getting to see him as Victor Timely, not to, jump too far around, but
Well, I'm
he is
glad you're
a strong
mentioning that.
actor.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad you're mentioning that because I think that's another weird thing that's also been going on this year with the Marvel films, and that is the post-credit scenes. It's like they used to be very direct as to where we were going in the story, but with these films, it's like we got in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, we got two very, I'm not going to say bad, but we got two very interesting ones. I mean, the Council of Kangs. I know all about the Council of Kangs. So
That was
clearly, once again, they're doing the multiverse thing. We know what Secret Wars is. We know the multiverse because we've seen what happened in Spider-Man No Way Home. We saw what happened in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We're leading to Secret Wars, Jonathan Hickman's masterpiece. Is it going to be exactly what I want it to be? Personally, I don't think so, especially because of what I read. But we got the Council of Kang, so who knows what this means. And then we got Kevin Feige caught in his lie again, because then we get a post-credit scene with characters from a Disney Plus television show.
Yeah, that was
And of
basically
course,
just a scene they pulled right from Loki season 2. Like they just like took it and were like, here you go. Because that was one of the things I noticed, like once I started to watch the show and get into the episode, I was like, oh, they just took that scene and just pulled it like directly from the episode and just like threw it at the end, and we're like, be excited for Loki. But like that was the thing I was most excited about walking out the theater, because anyone who knows me knows how much I love Loki. I say as I'm also wearing my Loki ring at the moment.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think the last time that I recorded, I had my Loki jersey that I was wearing, and I was going to still wear it, but I was like, I'm just going to wear my Disneyland one because I was just in Anaheim. But anyway, I'm a massive Loki fan, so I was psyched about that just because I was like, I love Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson. I love the Loki series. And so that made me happy to see that, as much as it is kind of like, just like, again, the idea of just like taking a snippet of the show and throwing it in and being like, they're done. Whereas I feel like the post-credit scenes, there was some fun and there was some excitement to them, I feel like, before. And I feel like now it's like, okay, what's the next release that I have to look forward to? And it's just like sort of like the same way where we would watch a show and you would get a teaser for like, here's what the next episode is going to be next week. It kind of feels like that in a sense, where it's like, here's the next thing that you're going to have to watch and stay tuned for. Which I mean, like, is what the post-credit scenes are supposed to be, but I feel like they were more fun and creative and inventive before.
Right, exactly. So we'll get into the TV shows later. We'll do the TV shows the same way that we did it last time. But now I want to get into the successful comic book film, the successful installment of MCU Phase 5, the one that a lot of people, if anything, everyone was really looking forward to. And it's really funny because of the fact that the one thing that really upsets me about the whole MCU burnout and the superhero fatigue is how, especially in social media and on the internet, how much hate comic book movies are getting these days, and how when the movie is announced, how they're excited and saying, oh, this movie is going to bomb at the box office. And I remembered that people were saying that the projections for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 were not looking good. And I'm just saying to myself, well, I know that James Gunn has been officially brought over to DC to do the Kevin Feige type of role. A lot of people aren't happy with what he's doing right now with the DCU because he basically killed off the DCEU, and all the DC movies that came out in 2023 didn't seem worthy or relevant anymore. So I can understand why there was a lot of hate towards James Gunn. But I knew for a fact that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was not going to be a bad movie. I could feel it because this was the most successful grouping of films in the MCU next to the Avengers films. So I was expecting a very enjoyable movie. Personally, I think I got a hell of a lot more than I paid for, because this movie, while it did have good comedy, it had some really fantastic dramatic elements. The story of Rocket was unbelievably emotional.
So good.
Another film with a very strong and threatening villain. I mean, the High Evolutionary is a character that I know very well. Strangely enough, he's really more found in the world of X-Men, But the fact that he was shown in the Marvel cosmic universe makes a lot of sense as well. I remember somebody saying the one thing I didn't like about the High Evolutionary was that he was very angry and shouty. I'm like, well, as someone who read the comics, I'm going to say that they got him down to a T because he is very over the top. He is very crazy. He is very much insane. So as far as I'm concerned, the High Evolutionary was done perfectly in Guardians Volume 3.
Yeah.
But I just loved everybody that came to the table. I love that Mantis got such a big role in this film. I loved her in this film. I loved her. I always loved her chemistry with Drax. I love Dave Bautista in these films. Rocket is great. Groot is great. Even the whole recreation of the relationship between Star-Lord and Gamora was great. Everything about this movie was very much enjoyable, except for maybe one or two things. But I also really loved the worlds that they had. Like I loved that Earth with anthropomorphic animals. It was just so cool to see. It's like it really looked like a Disney movie come to life because Disney is all about anthropomorphic animals. I've never actually seen like live action stuff in that sense. But
Yeah.
no, I thought that it was a movie that was filled with like this really was James Gunn trying to get a proper end to his story. He really put a lot of time and effort into it. It was crisp. It flowed well. He never missed a beat. Used more great classic rock in his movie. It was a very very well done film and a great closeout to his trilogy.
I was stunned by how much I liked this movie. I think because I was starting to feel sort of the Marvel fatigue at this point too. And my friends that I went and saw this movie with like weren't, one of them I think was a Guardians fan, the other wasn't. So she was like, I'm reluctantly going, but she's like, I'll go. And I also wasn't like the biggest Guardians fan myself, but I know I'm like, I go and I see all the Marvel movies. I do it because it's just a tradition at this point, and I like keeping up with them. And like again, Guardians has just never really been my favorite of the trilogies. Like the first movie was never really one of my favorites. I did like the second one a little bit more. And so I went into this movie with the bar being on the floor and I was stunned by how much I really liked this movie. And I think that was because of the focus on Rocket. Like I think that story was just so well done and it pulls at your heartstrings. And I think it's because you're sort of playing with that same territory. You're playing with like Baby Groot and Baby Yoda and like stuff like that always does so well. And I feel like it fit into that little box very well of Marvel being like, here's some really cute and adorable creatures, and they're going to have a lot of sad things happen with them. And it's going to make your heart melt and you're going to pull at your heartstrings. And I feel like they just did that very, very well. But yeah, I also loved, now that like, as you were talking and you mentioned it, I loved Drax's storyline and where they went with his character. And that really, really surprised me. And I felt like I just got to appreciate the Guardians as individual characters more than I feel like I ever did. And I feel like, again, it's because it is this conclusion. And so you're trying to put a stamp on all of these characters and really wrap up their arcs. And it felt like they were less comedic, farcical characters. And I felt like each of them really had some strong, endearing moments, which I really, really liked. And yeah, I was just like, again, I was surprised how much fun I had with it. And was very, very happy with this film in some of the
And I completely forgot to mention the character that really changed the most for the better. I was so impressed with Nebula. I mean, I
Yes.
love Karen Gillan. I love her as an actress, but the fact that they actually turned a character that was so serious to give it a little bit of lighthearted comedy moments to actually like make a robotic creature feel sympathetic and have comedy bits. It was just James Gunn did it well, and everybody who had his direction, they all played their parts well, except for one. And I don't know, and I gotta say it now. I was so let down by Adam Warlock.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. I was like, they put him in this movie, and again, like they make such a big deal about like including these characters, and then they're like, it falls flat. Because I literally wrote that in my notes. I was word for word, what was the point of Adam Warlock? I felt like he was there. Like the only thing I really that stood out to me was that he rescued Quill at the end. And I still thought Quill was gonna die. I really went into that movie being like, they're gonna kill off Quill, and that's gonna be like the end of the guard, like the big tears. He's the leader of the whole thing, and he goes out, and so I was like fully expecting like him to die in that scene, and then Adam Warlock comes and rescues him, and I'm like, there we go. That was the whole point of his character.
I
I
mean,
was like, that was it.
Warlock is a fantastic character in the comics, and yes, he has
Yeah,
been on Guardians of the Galaxy, but I think also because of the fact that I am a big fan of Will Poulter. I think that
yeah.
Will Poulter is a fantastic actor. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Detroit, where he
Mm.
plays a dirty cop, and he was like such a terrifying villain in that movie. But I mean, I remember him from the third Chronicles of Narnia film, and I remember him from the Maze Runner. He's a good actor, and this
Yeah.
was just one of those situations where you have a great actor and you just don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, I feel like again because this was a conclusion film and there's so many things they're wrapping up, a lot more of the focus is on the Guardians and telling their story, but then also you want to bring Adam Warlock in because you kind of want to bring him into the Guardians and you want to introduce and again start that new wave, like set up, set up, set up. And I feel like sometimes it's okay to focus on wrapping everything up in a nice bow and putting all of your time and energy into that instead of like having to build for what's next and constantly like look towards the future. Like it's okay to stay in the present and stay with those characters and finish their story and put all of your love and energy into that. So then you don't just feel like you're throwing in a character who you want in to sort of whatever you're going to do for the future of the MCU, but then you don't really give them the love and appreciation you deserve because the focus has to be elsewhere as it should because those characters deserve a proper conclusion.
Yeah, and I
So,
mean, and there was also some people that were saying, like, you had those amazing post-credit scenes at the end of Volume 2, particularly when you see Sylvester Stallone's character. I will use his superhero alias. He's Starhawk, and those people that were in the room were some of the original Guardians of the Galaxy from the 1960s. So I know Michael Rosenbaum, he played Martinex, and Karuger and Mainframe. These are other characters that showed up in the Guardians comics throughout the 70s through the 90s. So people were saying, like, where did these guys go? Like, weren't these guys going to have a bigger role? Like, weren't they going to possibly be? I mean, Ving Rhames, Charlie 27, like, these are characters that I know. I was like, how come we didn't get more of these guys? Because the post-credit scenes of Volume 2 were basically telling us these guys were going to do something here. I was like wondering why they didn't, you know?
I feel like that's a reoccurring theme too with Marvel where they like set up something or they allude to something and then plans completely change and things go off to the wayside. Because that's kind of how I felt. I think with one of the Doctor Strange post-credit scenes, there was a scene with Chidoe Edelfor's character, and they were sort of setting him up to be an antagonist, and then it just like took so long before we
Yeah.
got another Doctor Strange film, and then we got Multiverse of Madness, and obviously, like I felt like that post-credit scene never really went anywhere because the next time you see his character is just in a different multiverse, like you don't see him again. And it's just been a hot second since I've watched some of these movies, so I'm trying to like pull from my memory, but that's definitely an instance where I think like you have instances of these post-credit scenes of Marvel wanting to go a certain direction and then just life happens and they have different places they want to go and stories end up changing. But I feel like there is such an opportunity to play with characters they already have, play with things they've already introduced, and just like stick and stay true to that path rather than having to pivot and change so much. And I feel like that's maybe, again, what some of the problems could be with like where things are going is there is this constant pivot change. And it's like, trust yourself, trust your instincts. Like you've built what you've built because of all the things that you've done before, because you're staying true to where you're going and you knew the direction you were going. And it was very clear what you were building towards. Because I think that is the case with like, the whole first chapter of Marvel, the whole Infinity Sagas, it felt like every film in a way was building towards that. And now it feels like we're kind of weaving and twisting and turning all over the place with
Yeah,
all the different stories that we're telling. And so it's, I think, hard to have a clear path. And you want to introduce this character and you want to throw this character in, but then there's these characters we can bring in, and it's just gotten kind of messy, I think.
well, I think that it's funny that you mentioned that because I was actually hearing something today when I was just had a little bit of time. I was browsing some stuff because clearly what was my main goal today? I was trying to find out just exactly how bad Madam Web was. So I was listening to a
I've heard.
lot of people talking about it. But
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing that a lot of people are saying about the MCU, particularly with the post-credit scenes and just the movies in general, is the fact that, we said this just a couple of minutes ago, how there's so much more out there. There's so many more stories to tell. So they're trying to spread themselves out at this point in time and really show you how vast the MCU really is. So I'm wondering if the question is, are we like starting to spread our ways as far as we possibly can and then bottleneck all the way to Secret Wars? I don't know. But you're absolutely right. I feel that with the first 23 films, oh God, 23 films, that is crazy to say.
Yeah.
I feel that with 23 films that the post-credit scenes were very much streamlined and they all did make sense in regards to where they were going. I mean, the only other thing that I am still a little upset about is the fact that we still don't have any possibilities of a Howard the Duck movie. And if there's one thing that I love about James Gunn is the fact that, well, there's two things. I love that James Gunn really wanted to show that Howard Duck is relevant because I don't know if you know this, but the very first Marvel comic book film ever made was Howard the Duck in 1986. And it's like one of the most hated movies ever made. So I feel that James Gunn is trying to give Howard the Duck the true credit where credit is due. As a matter of fact, this year was Howard the Duck's 50th anniversary. That is kind of crazy. Actually, it was last year. Yeah, he was created in 1973. And I read the one-shot comic celebrating Howard the Duck. It was just satire and silliness. That's what Howard the Duck really is. But I also had to give James Gunn credit because of the fact that he gave the voicing to Seth Green. Because did you also know that this year Seth Green turned 50 years old and he's
Amazing.
collecting these big paychecks from doing all of this voiceover work? I mean, he's still doing Family Guy, he's still doing Robot Chicken. The fact that he is the voice of Howard the Duck personally makes me very happy as a Marvel fan.
Yeah. That was a great choice.
Yeah, so yeah, I thought that Guardians was phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I guess the whole thing with Adam Warlock was I thought that he was going to be the big baddie. I really did. And in the end, he just ended up being this very goofy character. But in the end, he becomes a member of the Guardians, as he should be. So, what did you think of the new lineup of the Guardians of the Galaxy? How do you think about Rocket now officially being the leader?
I think that feels like a very natural shift with the way that this movie went and really focusing on him. It makes sense that he takes the lead. And with everything that they gave you, again, like I think the main takeaway for this movie just was Rocket's storyline and his backstory. Like those scenes just ate at my heart. And I loved all of his little friends and meeting all of them. They were great. Um, and so to me, like that, it makes so much sense. And it's interesting to see like a new wave of Guardians. But again, it feels like it makes sense because it feels like a lot of this chapter of Marvel is wrapping up with some of our characters that are still hanging around from the previous phases. If we haven't like wrapped up their stories or said goodbye to them, like the way we did Captain America and Iron Man. Chris Evans is Captain America and Iron Man. And we sort of like wrapped up those stories. We wrapped up Black Widow's story. We've gotten some sort of conclusion to Thor. Like we're taking all these characters who've been around for like 10 plus years and kind of capping off their stories. And so it makes sense for Guardians for that to be the same sort of thing but like still keep those characters around in order to contribute to, again, like the new Avengers movies and the Secret Wars and where everything is going and still getting to see some of those characters around. And I think it's a fun, new, fresh team. And I'm excited to see what they do with them.
Yeah, I think the other big surprise was the big role that Cosmo had. I mean, the Cosmo did show up in the very first Guardians film, so it was very interesting to see her have a much bigger role. And now she's actually on the Guardians, and I'm just like saying to myself, well, what exactly is she going to do? I'm just trying to figure
Yeah.
it out. But clearly, I don't know. I mean, look, the funny thing was at the end of the post-credit scene, it said Star-Lord will return. So I don't know
Yeah,
what
that
that means.
interests me. Yeah, especially that like end credit scene that they had with Chris Pratt. I was like, okay, where are we going? Because again, like I said, I fully expected his character to be like killed off or something by the end of it and to just kind of like say goodbye to Star-Lord. I wasn't really expecting to see him any further. And
So the television shows, I mean, the one thing that we're not going to probably talk about is I Am Groot season 2. I never watched
yeah,
it.
I didn't
So
watch it either. I did watch like the first, I think like the first season, I was like working and I just was at a point where I had like nothing else I was watching. And I was like, I'll go and do that. And I like binged through some of them. But yeah, I never touched the second season.
So we had a real mixed bag this year because we had Secret Invasion, Loki season 2, and we had What If season 2. That was a big surprise to get it right before the year ended. So, like it's been a while since we sat down and talked about these things, Gabby. So the question that I was going to say was, what was your favorite and what was your least favorite out of all of them? But I personally think that What If season 2 was my personal favorite, and Secret Invasion was my least favorite.
Yeah. I think no surprise to anyone that Loki season 2 was my favorite. I feel like I'm just biased in that regard. It could have been absolutely awful, and I would have been like, "This is great," because Tom Hiddleston is in it, and I love Tom Hiddleston. The man can do no wrong. He's just a phenomenal actor. So Loki season 2 was very, very much my favorite. And Secret Invasion was my least favorite. I had high hopes for Secret Invasion, and they were
Yeah,
squash.
I mean, Loki's. I wasn't the biggest fan of the first season of Loki. I mean, I have nothing against Tom Hiddleston. I love
Yeah,
Tom Hiddleston. I have nothing against Owen Wilson either, or Gugu and
yeah.
Bothell. I have nothing against any of them. I will say the highlight of Loki season 2 for me was Kiwi Kwan. I love
Yes,
him.
absolutely.
He's one of my. I mean,
Absolutely.
you don't understand. I grew up with this kid. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, The Goonies. Like, I love this guy. And the fact
His
that
resurgence
he's an
in
Oscar winner.
the
I love the
entertainment
fact that he has
world
an Oscar. I do.
is yeah, his resurgence in the entertainment world was simply one of the best things, and I was thrilled when I found out he was gonna be in the second season of Loki, and he did not disappoint. He was phenomenal.
He's like Paul Rudd. He's a charmer. You
Yes.
love him because he knows how to do it well. But the story itself was very interesting. It wasn't, I just don't think it was my cup of tea. But again, I like the characters. I was quite surprised with how the show ended and where Loki is right now. And
Cheers.
the only thing that makes me the questions that I have is, are we going to see Loki again? Because from what I have heard, if I am wrong, I have heard that Tom Hiddleston said he's done.
Yeah. I like it's
So
one of those things where I'm like, I love Loki and I will take more Loki content any day and every day I can get it. But at the same time, I feel like the second season felt like such a nice conclusion in the way that like Infinity War did not. Like I was mad
oh,
with
you
what
and
they did
so
with
many
Loki in
others.
Infinity War. But I understand like why they did that, but I was like, no, that is not how his character ends. But walking out of Loki season 2, I was like, this feels fitting. This feels like the end. And it felt so much more like, as much as it felt heartbreaking to me, I also was like, this is a perfect full circle for this character who started out as a villain and started out very misunderstood and then kind of transforms into a little bit of an anti-hero. And then you start to like sympathize with him a little bit by Ragnarok, and then he obviously dies in Infinity War, and you're like really bummed about it because you're like, oh, I'm starting to like his character. And then you get to see him and Loki really have to come to terms with like who he is and having to be like, you know, shown his whole life in front of him and questioning what it means to be a Loki and having like a whole essentially identity crisis. And then having going into that second season, having to figure out like what it is that he wants and like him valuing his friendships. There's a really amazing scene towards the end of the season between him and between Loki and Sylvie, where they sort of talk about that and him talking about his friends and how he values that. And that was just a really beautiful transformation to see, and seeing him become a hero, like making the sacrifice. And even some of like the dialogue parallels, I think, between the first Thor film, I think that was what the line parallel was, is the line in the first Thor film that parallels like one of his Loki's last lines in Loki season 2. And I feel like it is just such a beautiful, beautiful ending for
Yeah,
that character to start out as the villain and become the hero. And it's so rare you get to see an actor get to play with a character for that long and that much depth to get to have that much of a significant transformation. And there's nobody better to do that than Tom Hiddleston. He is Loki and understands and knows that character so well. And it's such a joy to see him play that character every single time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big positives were I was very glad that even amongst the controversy that they kept the story the way it was. They kept Jonathan Majors in the show as Victor
What's
Timely.
phenomenal is Victor Timely. It was so
Yeah,
interesting to see, like, again, see him as Kang in Quantumania and then see a completely different side of that character with Victor Timely. And I loved the interactions between like Victor Timely and Ouroboros and oh my gosh, Eugene Cordero's character, Casey.
mhm.
Um, and getting to see the three of them together, I thought they were a really fun, quirky trio, and I liked their scenes together.
Yeah. And the other thing that I did appreciate about the show was how they really gave you an understanding of the multiverse and how it works. The fact that the people who
Yeah,
discovered who they were and that they just wanted to get back to their lives, and yet they don't understand the dangers of the various timelines. Because what's very interesting is I go back to Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and the scene where he is in front of the Illuminati, there's a word that Reed Richards uses that now that I've actually read the source material is the most important thing in the world. And that is when he mentions the following line: the longer you stay here, the more likely the risk of an incursion. And
mm,
that's the big thing about the multiverse in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that will eventually lead to Secret Wars. The fact that the something is going to trigger these worlds, these universes, these alternate times to cross into each other. And if that, God forbid, happens, either one or both worlds gets destroyed. So
yeah,
that's where the multiverse storyline, God willing, is going to go. And it made sense as to why the whole thing with the one who remains, he who remains, why he did what he did with the linear timeline, because this is an outcome of different realities, and it's
yeah,
dangerous. So I'm glad that they harped on that to a certain degree. I'm glad that they made it a little bit more understandable and explained it. But again, this should really be something that should be seeing in the films
yeah.
and not
And that's
on the
why it is so
television
important
shows.
to watch the shows. But yeah, um, yeah, I mean, like, it is, again, like, it is so hard to keep up with all the different media and bounce to different places. And now that Marvel is growing so much, it's like you need to go and see the movie and then go and see the show. And so you're kind of bouncing around all over the place, which I think is also, again, where some of the fatigue comes from. But again, this was like one of the things that immediately, like, I signed on to Disney Plus for. I was like, I'm subscribing to Disney Plus so I can watch those seasons of Loki when they happen. And I was psyched when there was a second season that was going to be announced because that hadn't happened yet with one of the Disney Plus shows that they had done. And I was glad that we get to have a second part of this story. Other highlights for me for this season, I have to shout out Tara Strong as Miss Minutes. They take her in some really creepy directions
I
in this
love
season.
Tara
She's
Strong.
a
I'm such a
phenomenal voice
fan.
actor. Talking about just voice actors, Seth Green, Tara Strong is another really phenomenal one, and she does a great job with Miss Minutes, and they made her super creepy. I also just love scenically where the season goes because the first season of Loki, you just have Loki in his one uniform, like his TVA uniform. And I feel like there was a lot more hope of like, oh, we're going to go different places. And then this second season, you have a lot more stuff on location. Chicago is in the show, the World's Fair. As a Chicagoan myself, that made my heart very, very, very happy. And I really did love that episode that was centered in Chicago. And I think, yeah, there's some really devastating moments in the show, and it gets kind of dark at points, which I liked, and I think it's a great conclusion for Loki as a character. And I liked getting to see Mobius finally on his jet ski. That felt
Oh,
like
yes.
a huge
Yeah.
payoff. That was wonderful. Um,
Yeah.
that was just great. And I
I got
love the
yeah.
time slipping too. I thought that was interesting. And I think Tom Hiddleston, because I watched the behind the scenes for this, like what he had to do as an actor physically with his body to then like create the way that that looked. And I thought that was
Right.
interesting.
I got a big question for you. Did you ever pick up your physical copy of Loki season 1?
Yes, I did.
Just wanted to make sure you did, because I know that would be something that you should have. Because God forbid they take it off of Disney Plus, you have it. Because
Yeah.
that's a conversation that I've had that and that's the funniest thing. The whole thing that's going on the internet, along with superhero fatigue, is people talking about the saving of physical media. And
Yeah.
I'm literally posting videos on my Facebook page. I'm like, here's another one. Here's another one. It's a thing. People are getting it. People are getting it. I told people that streaming was not a good thing. So,
Yeah.
so I'm glad that
Especially now
people
that
are.
so many streaming services are charging for ads too. And it's like, wasn't this the whole point of like why we came to streaming in the first place,
Yep.
was to avoid the
Yep.
ads? So it's like
So,
streaming is becoming cable, and it's like everything is a big circle.
so Secret Invasion.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. I feel terrible for Samuel L. Jackson. I really, really do. I mean, it's like, and I also feel bad for him in the Marvels too, but we'll get to that. But no, it's just like
Yeah.
he was such a Nick Fury is such a great character, and and the other thing is Secret Invasion. And this is something that I feel that the MCU has been getting horribly, horribly wrong, and they've been getting it wrong since Captain Marvel. The whole thing with the Kree and the Skrull, that
Yeah.
is a much larger piece of Marvel. There is such a history of the Kree Skrull War.
Yeah.
And I just hate the fact that they're making it so ambiguous, because the Skrulls in the comics are the bad guys. They are. And the Kree are not necessarily the good guys, but you know, they're doing a lot less damage. They're not like trying to take over Earth, you know? That's
It
one of
feels
the
like the roles are reversed a little bit.
it does. It's just like I love Ben Mendelsohn as Talos. He's great. But
Justice for Ben. I wrote that in my notes. I said justice for Talos. I was livid. I was so
I
mad.
know.
Because that was one of the reasons why I watched that show. I was like so psyched. I was like, I love Talos. I'm excited to see more of him as a character. And they were like, no.
what a waste of time for Amelia Clark.
Yeah.
I love her in Game of Thrones, and that's the funny thing about her. It's like she has potential to be such a great actress and do so many other films, and it's just like, why are you on this? Why was she here? What was
Yeah.
the point? Like,
Also Maria Hill. Justice for Maria Hill. I wrote justice for Talos and Maria Hill.
Justice for Robin Sparkles. I mean, for crying out loud.
That was literally the thing that made me so mad, as I went into that and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is an opportunity to finally get to see more of Maria Hill, because she's kind of been along and in the different movies, but she's always kind of been a side character hanging out. And this could be an opportunity to really see her and get to see, just like to get to have like that duo between Samuel L. Jackson. And I was just like, I was really psyched about it. And then they were like, no, she's going to die in like the first episode. And I was like, what
it was one mistake after the other, and also I also just hated the fact that the Secret Invasion story is a vast story, and once again, the Kree and the Skrull and the cosmic universe is just like they tried to make it such a small thing, but it's really supposed to be a bigger world.
Spread so thin, because it's like, what do you focus on? You know, because I think that's the struggle, and the thing that I noticed with Marvel is like, with the first chapter of the MCU with the Infinity Saga, it's like everything builds the Infinity Saga and it was very streamlined. And now obviously you're building and you're doing a lot more, which I think is great. But the problem is that if you're gonna build, you have to give everything equal weight. You have to, like, if you're gonna focus on the Kree and the Skrull and tell that story, you have to tell it properly. You can't just squish it in and then like we're also gonna tell the multiverse story, you know, and everything. Which is why, as much as I think it's great to get to really pan out and like show everything that Marvel's capable of and all the range and all the different characters that they have and bring new people in, new characters that people aren't as familiar with. I think the issue with that is that you then spread yourself so thin. And so then you have stories that are really good quality stories that turn into something like this, where they're not given the time and the appreciation and the effort that they deserve, the quality that they deserve. You're not able to go as in length with where you want to go with the story, because you're just cramming it in to fit it into another piece of puzzle of like where is everything going. And I just feel like Marvel was at its strongest when they picked what direction they want to go in, and then they built everything towards that, and everything was a puzzle piece towards that, and they put their heart and soul into then taking that one thing, putting all their focus into it, and using that as a puzzle piece for where they want to go. But when you're trying to tell like a multiverse story and the Kree and the Skrull storyline, and you just can't put, especially with everything going on again with the SAG strike and everything else, there's just, it's too many moving puzzle pieces, and it's, I think, very hard to give everything the equal weight that it deserves. So then you have stories like this that fall really flat, and people want to see these stories done well, and you gotta pick and
Exactly.
choose.
No, I mean, Secret Invasion was definitely more movie potential than television show potential. It could have been much grander based on what it used, based on what it actually is. And no, I was just like, I was bored to tears while watching this thing, and I felt, like I said,
I zoned out from time to time too.
I felt so bad for Sam Jackson. I really do, because I love Nick Fury in this world, but it's just like, what a waste. This was such a waste of time, such a waste of energy. And at the end of the day, I also hated the villain, because that villain is known, the real name of that villain is known as the Super Skrull.
Mhm.
And I saw what they did with him, but the truth of the matter is, if you don't know who the Super Skrull is, the Super Skrull is actually a genetically enhanced Skrull that carries all of the four powers of the Fantastic Four. He's a
Mhm.
Fantastic Four villain, which is another reason why I was surprised that they were bringing the Kree and the Skrull in when they did, because I'm like, this is Fantastic Four territory you're getting into. I mean, that's also one of the, I completely forgot to mention this, but that was one of the other big surprises. I'm surprised that we didn't get from Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. There were so many rumors that they were going to find the Fantastic Four in the quantum realm and bring
Yeah.
them into the MCU finally. But I don't know. It's just like they were doing a whole bunch of things before certain franchises and characters were supposed to make it in there. But then what if season 2 comes out with a big surprise? And I got to admit, I did not care much for the first season, but I really enjoyed the second season. There were some stories that were better than others. There were two specific stories that I liked, and I'm pretty sure one of them was yours. I loved the introduction of Kahori. I thought that that was such a great idea, but
Very
I
meaningful.
also was so impressed by the fact that they gave tribute to the comic book 1602 by Neil Gaiman. That is a big fan favorite amongst many, and to actually see a really great story given an opportunity to shine in the perfect place to do it. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know what the future of Kahori is, because this is Marvel trying to do what DC has been successful at doing so many times over, and that is creating brand new characters, ironically in animation, like Harley Quinn and Batman Beyond, just to name a few, and then they end up in the comics and they were never there. So I don't know what the future of Kahori is. I don't know if she will be in Secret Wars. I don't know if she will get a comic book of her own. I don't know if there's going to be enough of a fan base to have this character grow. But I got to admit, the story was very different, very impressive. I got to give Marvel props for doing something very well
Yeah.
in the right place. That was definitely, well, in terms of Native American representation, we're not going to discuss this specific character until next year, but I will say that Kahori, they did a much better with her than they did with Echo. And
Yeah.
that's just me saying something there. But no, I thought that What If season 2, and get, of course, getting Jeffrey Wright back to voice the Watcher, great.
It's great.
Another character that's linked to the Fantastic Four. I'm just saying. But no, and once again, another episode with Howard the Duck is in there. So it's like I had much better time with season 2 than I did with season 1.
Yeah. I think I liked the first season of What If better. I just think I liked the idea, and I feel like What If was created out of the idea of like, what can we do that we aren't able to do in the MCU? And you have a lot more fun ideas. Like I like the What If is zombies, and I think there's just a lot more like fun farcical episodes, which is kind of what I liked in the comics. And I think that like the first season, I think is more of a romp. It's more fun. You get a lot more like out of the box plot lines. But I think that season 2 is kind of the other end of the coin, in that it's a lot more impactful and meaningful in terms of the content and the storylines that it creates. And I think Kahori is a prime example of that, because that episode is so meaningful in terms of like the Native American representation. the Native representation and
Great
the
story to go
language
with
and
that.
everything. Yeah, and it's a really brilliant story and how her character then carries through to the rest of the season.
Because
I think she's really interesting, and yeah, whether they bring her into live action or what they do, I think she's a interesting character, and that
Because
definitely is.
that's what, but that's the thing that a lot of people are starting to yell about when there's all of these fights amongst diversity in terms of different kinds of people from different kinds of background. What people at the end are basically saying is it doesn't matter what the characters looks like. Just give me a great story that goes along with it.
Yeah,
If the story is what's going to drive these characters, then everything else is just going to fall into place, and you can have as much representation as you want. If you just forget about the fact that you have to check boxes and just write a story and then just build it
then
from there, better
yeah,
things are going to happen for you. And that's why Kahori worked and Echo didn't.
yeah, for sure. Um, I think it's all yeah, it is important though if you're gonna do that, like to have the people in the room who can tell that story and
Because think about it, one of the most diverse casts in terms of different kinds of people, different kinds of skin colors is Guardians of the Galaxy. No, because you got Zoe Saldana, you got Dave Bautista, you got Chris Pratt, you got so many different kinds of people in that movie, and there's a great story to go along with it, and that's why it works. You're right. You got to have the right kinds of people in the room to write the story, but you got to write a good story. And if the story is great, no
yeah,
one's going to care about everything else. Everyone's just going to enjoy what you're giving us. And again, that's why Kahori was such a great character. That's why the story was so well done. It was very well executed, very well written. Loved how she played it into the very end of the storyline with Captain Carter. It was great. It was absolutely wonderful. I very much gave Marvel props for doing something right in a whole sea of so many times that they've done wrong in 2023.
yeah. I feel like What If is an area where Marvel has really succeeded because I feel like it's a space where they can play around, but also create really meaningful and impactful stories that they can then take into the MCU, which they kind of did a little bit with the first season and then Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And there was some connects there, which was nice. Um, but yeah, I think What If is something that I was definitely like I wasn't so sure about when they first announced it. And I'm like, this is a really successful little venture for them in terms of being able to tell really short, cohesive, strong stories and be able to build upon them. And I think having Jeffrey Wright as the Watcher, the voice of that, is a big part of that. He's phenomenal and is such a great person to carry that role. I'd love to see the Watcher somehow find his way into the actual live action MCU. I want to see Jeffrey Wright
I,
on
I
my
I will tell you that I don't think you're going to see Jeffrey Wright as Utao, but you'll definitely see a digital character
Mm,
because you've already seen what he looks like. Do you remember that
yeah,
scene in Guardians 2 when Stan Lee is on that moon? Those are
yeah,
Watchers. So you kind of have to have them look like that. But
check.
no, I will let you know, as someone who read the source material of Secret Wars, Utao does play a very big role. So I'm having a feeling that we will see him, and especially if a certain family of superheroes finally comes into the MCU next year and we get Galactus, then we'll see Utao as well. That's just in case you didn't know, that's his real name. But
Yes.
anyway, so then we capped off 2023 with the Marvel, and wow, I was absolutely dumbfounded by
That's
the
a great word
by,
choice.
by the hate that this movie got, and the fact that this is now known as the first box office bomb of the MCU. So, of course, I didn't see it in theaters. I mean, I was someone who was going to see MCU films religiously in theaters pre-pandemic and pre-baby. Like last year, I had an opportunity to see 3 different comic book movies, and I chose to see something else instead. So it just shows you how my attitude had changed. So of course, the Marvels was not on my to see list because I don't have the opportunity to go to the theater that much anymore, at least for at least another 2 or 3 years, maybe a little less than that. So I was expecting to see when it finally hit Disney Plus, I was expecting to see the worst movie I ever saw in my life. I was surprised by how much it wasn't in my world. I
Mhm.
not loved it, because at the end of the day, the movie is poorly executed, poorly produced. The visual effects are horrible,
Mhm.
but there is one shining light in this movie. And that's the reason why I did not despise it as much as I thought. I thought this was going to be like a 0-star movie. So can you guess what saved the movie for me?
I would hope it's Iman Vellani because that's
It
what it was for
is
me.
Iman Vellani, because
She's adorable. I adore
I
her.
love her. She has, like Paul Rudd, she is so charming. Because
Yeah.
even though I didn't think that Ms. Marvel was the best show, like I said to you, I loved the first episode, loved the last episode, didn't understand what the other episodes were for. But I love her because she is
Great.
fun, she is charming, and you can tell that this is a fangirl playing a fangirl in
And
a
that's
Marvel
representation of
superhero world, because every single time the camera's on her, she's got these ginormous anime eyes and this big smile, basically saying, I am so happy to be here right now. But I
yeah.
also appreciate her off the camera, because when she was asked about the poor reception of her movie, she didn't do what the director and what other people like. She didn't blame white men. She didn't blame this. She didn't blame identity politics. She didn't blame political satire. She blamed Bob Iger. She said, I did what I had to do. I did whatever I could to make myself a good presence in this movie. It's his fault that this movie is bad, because you don't know what you're doing, Disney, in your production rooms. You don't know, the higher ups have no idea what they're doing. And it's not just in Marvel, it's all over the place. They
Yeah.
basically can't, Disney is in such hot water right now. They cannot get the seats filled in theaters like they used to. They couldn't. And it was so sad because it was the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Studios, and they
Yeah.
couldn't even get people extremely enthusiastic about the 100-year celebration. Once Upon a Studio was wonderful. Wish
I
was
love that.
so-so. But
Yeah.
I'm just like saying to myself, like, in the next couple of years, we're going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the start of the MCU in 2028. And the year before that, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Star Wars. I don't think people are going to be excited for these celebrations anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
considering that, yeah, in 2028, Mickey Mouse is going to be 100 years old.
Jeez.
So the fact that there's no enthusiasm there anymore. And I just appreciated the fact that Iman Vellani said, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
And it's not the viewers, because we all have to also remember the opening statistics on opening weekend for the Marvels. 69% of the people that went to see the Marvels were men. So it's not like men didn't want to go see the movie. So she said,
Right.
it's Bob Iger's fault. Disney's a mess. I'm doing the best that I can. And she did the best that she could.
Yeah, she was great. She was definitely the standout of this movie, and I think because she is, like, in a way, a self-insert character, and you feel like, as the audience member who's geeking out and nerding out and is just passionate about comic book movies, that you see yourself in her, and she does a great job, and yeah, she was a highlight of this movie. Um, I was also excited for Zaw Ashton to see her as a villain, because obviously her and Tom Hiddleston are a dynamic duo. And
Mhm.
so I was excited both of them being in the MCU together, but I feel like it made sense. I was like, Tom Hiddleston is making his exit to the MCU. His wife gets to be in an MCU movie, but then she promptly, because I wasn't sure. I was like, are they going to build her? Is she going to be around? And then they were like, no, she's dead by the end of this movie. And I was like, okay,
I mean,
she's just
I
one and done.
actually appreciated her story, because she wasn't necessarily a villain. I mean, I thought it was very interesting because, you know, it reminded me a little bit of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and how Batman really thought that Superman was the enemy because he saw all the destruction that was going on in Metropolis while Superman and Zod were having their big fight in the sky. So here's a woman from the Kree Empire that sees Captain Marvel come in, do what she's doing, and as an innocent civilian, she is not. She has all the rights to be angry and all the rights to try and get vengeance and try and save her people. So her motivations made perfect sense to me. The problem
Yeah.
with the movie is it was just poorly put together. I mean, I think this movie was supposed
Felt
to be
confusing. I felt confused. I don't know why, but I was like, I've seen all of the Marvel movies. I've seen all the things. I'm caught up to where I should be. And I felt like the first chunk of this movie, I was like, why am I confused as to what's happening and what's going on? I
it
was like,
was
why
a
do I
little
feel
bit
like
out of
I'm
sync.
missing? I
Maybe
was
it was
like,
because they were trying to make the audience feel out of sync because the Marvels were out of sync and they were trying to come
yeah,
together and work as a unit, maybe. But the biggest problem with the Marvels is, again, this is where, like my wife and I were watching it, and my wife didn't, she was a little bit more confused, but it's also because of the fact that number one, she hasn't seen WandaVision. So this is the first time that she's seen Teyonah Paris as Monica Rambeau or as in the comics, she was Ms. Marvel in the 80s, and then she became a character now known as Photon. So it's like if you didn't see WandaVision, you don't know who she is. And Iman Vellani, I mean, it's like if you watched all 6 episodes of Ms. Marvel, you know her family. Her
yeah,
family got such a small role in this movie, and it was really sad because I remembered very much enjoying these characters on the show, even though I didn't
yeah,
like some of the episodes. But again, that's neither here nor there. But again, this is where I get very angry because Kevin Feige said you didn't need to watch these. But it's also the reason why Ms. Marvel should have been a movie. They really could have made Ms. Marvel a movie
yeah.
because there is a
Because
fan
it's
base for her.
interesting that they're trying to introduce these new characters now through the Disney Plus shows rather than the movies. Because it felt like every time, like at least in the very beginning, like Shang-Chi got a movie, the Eternals got a movie to introduce them, all the new characters. And then they were like, Moon Knight was the first time that we got a new character introduced through a Disney Plus show that is like, they're the main character, you know? And so that was a bit of a pivot. And I feel like they've been doing that now where they like give the new characters a show. And it's like, I don't know, because the idea is like with the show is like you have more episodes, you have more screen time. But also I feel like Marvel's so used to like introducing their characters, giving them plot in the 2 hour film that it's almost like you're giving them more time to work with and they don't know what to do with it. And so it feels kind of slow. And it's like, we can do the 2 hour thing. That's what we know how to do. And I feel like that could maybe be a lesson for Marvel. Like if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I feel like they were doing really, really well. And now they're trying to fix things that weren't broken. It's like we could go back to that 2 hour format. Like do what people know and like and was successful for you and use that as a way to get back on track.
My wife said something very interesting, and I can understand. I think she liked the Marvels a little bit more than I did, and she basically said this is Marvel's attempt at a chick flick.
Yeah, that's true.
And I can see the elements there. But again, and you want to know what's really funny? I enjoyed Brie Larson more in this movie than I did in the first movie. I think it's because she wasn't so stone cold. I just had fun with her. Again, I think the three actresses really worked well off of each other. I really
Yeah.
believe that they did.
The three of them had good chemistry. I will say the one part that was really jarring for me was the musical bit. I don't know. That came out of left field for me. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And I feel like it's because with Captain Marvel, like I was used to her having more of a like being very flat and sort of witty, having a dry sense of humor, I guess. And then this has felt very like Thor-esque in a way. And I was like, this is not normally the style of comedy that we play with for her character. And I was like, it felt out of left field for me. And normally, like I love musicals. Like just before this, I was like bopping along to my musical theater playlist.
So
But I feel like I want that to feel or like fit, like I'm like that. I feel like there's a space where that could belong and fit in somewhere. And I was like, I don't feel like this movie was it.
well, there were two musical moments. One that you just described that wasn't really executed well, but then there was the one that was executed beautifully, and that was when the Flurgan were rescuing all the people on the Saber shuttle
That
and
was
listening
great.
to memories. My
Yeah.
wife, you're not lying, my wife was dying during
Was
that scene. She thought it was
Yeah.
so funny, but at the same time, what was actually happening, she's like, oh my God, this is the most brilliant idea ever to rescue everybody. It was kind of out of, it was, there were, the thing it was also very interesting was there were some ideas that were thrown out from way out in left field. And yet, for some strange reason, it was those crazy ideas that actually seemed to work the most in the
Yeah.
movie. Because I was laughing my head off just because of the fact that we were listening to Memories with a whole bunch of alien cats running around. It was such a funny idea. But
Yeah.
that's why I'm saying I didn't. That's why I said, like I said, the movie is a mess. It is absolutely a mess. But I had some moments where I actually was having a good time. It's like Iron Man 2 didn't have as much of a good time as I wanted. Thor: Love and Thunder didn't have a great time with it at all. But at least with, yeah, and I mean, like, talk about convoluted ideas. It's like, at the end of Thor: Love and Thunder, we get Hercules. Where's he coming in? Like, what's going to happen with
Yeah.
him? Or the scene at
My
the
God.
end of Eternals with uh Kit
Harry Styles.
Harington.
Ooh,
Huh?
okay. I was gonna say Harry Styles. I felt in the wrong blank for you.
Well,
Yeah, they brought in
well, well,
Harry
Harry
Styles and Kid
Styles.
Harington.
Well, yeah, Harry Styles is Star Fox as well, but but with Kid Harington and the sword, I mean, he's supposed to be the famous Avenger, the Black Knight, and Hercules is supposed to be an Avenger as well. But clearly, that's where I'm leading into. It's like we have all of these other Avengers that have been introduced, and yet it doesn't even seem to me that we're even going to be going in that direction, because then we get the very end of the Marvels, and again, you had to see the Marvel television show because Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop shows up, and clearly they're pitching a Young Avengers movie.
Yes, I was psyched about that. I love Haley Steinfeld, so I
Me
was
too.
thrilled to
Me
see.
too. So it's I'm excited, but at the same time, I'm sort of a little bit peeved because of the fact that we're getting all of these other characters and we don't know what's happening to them now.
Yeah. Again, like I feel like you're just throwing a lot at the wall and you're seeing what sticks. And I feel like that's frustrating because it's like I completely forgot, like you brought up Hercules and I was like, oh my gosh, Brett Goldstein, who I literally just saw in Chicago in January. He's doing a stand-up comedy tour this year. And didn't even cross my mind when I saw him. He's going to be in the MCU. That completely slipped my mind because, again, there's so much that they're doing and so many characters that they've introduced in so many different directions that they're going in. And I'm like, it is overwhelming. And I have to imagine, like, I can't even imagine on their end having to build and put all of this together, because how are you introducing all of this and then going to give all of those characters the time and the space that they deserve?
And
Ugh.
speaking of things getting bigger, what was the main reason why I wanted to see the Marvels? I wanted to see a post-credit scene.
Yes,
And
that's
I was, again, like, if that was how I was going to finish this movie, then let me just say that I'm satisfied. And that was the fact that Monica ends up in the Foxverse. And we see her mother as a completely different character. She basically was rescued by the X-Men. And the fact that we got to see Beast, but in a different way, again, poorly CGI'd, I have to admit, but still, Beast is there nonetheless. And God, I'm so happy they got Kelsey Grammer back. I'm so glad that they still want to have Kelsey Grammer, even if it's just his voice. To me, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, Nicholas Hoult did a great job, but Kelsey Grammer as Beast, that was perfect casting from the get-go. So now we finally get the X-Men, and we've been alluding to the fact that
yeah.
the X-Men were coming because we got it in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We got it at the very end of Ms. Marvel when you hear the 90s X-Men cartoon theme song. So now we're full blown in it. The X-Men are now officially coming into the MCU. So that made me extremely excited. So that is one of the main reasons why the Marvels did not entirely fail for me, because I would probably say that this was the most linear post-credit scene that they have done since Phase 4 started. Because we know we're going to the multiverse. This was a great end credit scene. So they say it's quality over quantity. And now we know that there are two big things happening in the near future. And I'm looking forward to, I mean, I don't know how long our next video is going to be, if I'm being honest with you, Gabby, because I don't think we're going to be talking about much next year. But I will say that, is it possible? Let me ask the question, not just say, I'm going to ask the question. Is Deadpool the MCU Jesus? Could he possibly be the saving grace? Because I saw that Super Bowl trailer, and I'm not going to lie, I'm excited for this movie.
I'm psyched about Deadpool and the TVA. That just in and of itself, I had no idea that was going to happen. And I was like, yes. I was like, give me Deadpool and give me the TVA. Those are things that I like.
It made perfect sense. I mean, I know that it doesn't look like we're going to be getting Mobius, but we're getting a character called Mr. Paradox, who actually is the TVA leader in the comics. But the trailer reminded me of why this is all happening. Oh yeah, I forgot. Deadpool screwed around with time travel in the second movie, so he's creating variants. So now it all makes sense. So, the fact that the entire cast, minus JT Miller, are all coming back, the fact that Hugh Jackman, who said he was officially retired after Logan, is coming back.
Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds are going to be the saving graces of this movie. The two of them, just their friendship in and of itself is one of the greatest things. So getting to take that on screen, I am psyched. Please don't fail me, because the two of them are great. I think simply their interactions, even if the movie itself isn't quality, will be enough for me.
And I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but the girl who played X-23 in Logan, his daughter, she is apparently coming back in this film. So I've been watching her as an actress in I watched the HBO series of His Dark Materials. Daphne Keane, that's who she is. And I loved her in the show. So I'm excited to see her back too. But I think it's going to be, even though it's not Fox, it's still got the R rating. They announced that. And I just don't think Ryan Reynolds is going to let them screw around with his baby, because he is one of the main reasons why Deadpool is what he is. This is why the first two Deadpool films were so successful in the box office. So this could be the movie that brings everyone back into their seats. And what I'm hoping for is that we get more surprises than just Hugh Jackman. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Part of me is hoping Chris Evans returns as the Human Torch.
That would be great. I think people would be very psyched about that.
I just think it would be fun to see that.
But I wouldn't hate it. We did, because that was one of the things I was going to ask you about, just like looking forward. We just did, as of like 48 hours ago, got the casting announcement for Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
That I had mixed thoughts on, because it felt like something that was going to be a big deal. And then on Valentine's Day, they were like, here you go, here's the Fantastic Four cast. And I was like,
Well,
I deserved a bigger.
Yeah, I am a little surprised by that. I mean, that was the other thing that I was going to bring up. And that was the fact that we now know who the Fantastic Four are. And I am sorry and not sorry all at the same time, because I'm pretty much on the same side as the consensus. I don't understand why they cast Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic. I just don't think he fits. Everyone else that they announced, I personally thought fit the role. I just saw the fact that there are rumors that they are down to now 2 actors to play Doctor Doom. And they have announced that, from what I'm hearing, it's Henry Cavill and Cillian Murphy. I actually said this to my wife. I said, Henry Cavill would have been a better Reed Richards. Pedro Pascal would be an excellent Doctor Doom.
Yeah. I feel like it's the Pedro Pascal hype between like he's just been between the Mandalorian and I feel like the man's doing a lot. He needs a break.
He
I was
doesn't
like
have
sitting here
the
and I'm
look.
thinking about it, and I'm like, The Mandalorian, and they just announced they're doing a Mandalorian movie, and there's The Last of Us, and the man is currently sporting a shoulder sling. I'm like, he's got a lot going on at the moment. Like, I like Pedro Pascal, but
I
also I'm like,
do too.
I get it. I'm like, there was just such excitement about John Krasinski showing up in Multiverse of Madness, and I was like, oh, so that was a 5-minute cameo, and that
Yeah, that a lot of
I kind
people
of
are.
that's what I
Yeah,
got when I walked out of the theater. That was the vibes I was getting, but I was like, oh man, if
I
only.
mean, here's my overall attitude. I mean, yes, I don't know why they just made John Krasinski a throwaway, because clearly what that basically said to us was that he was only in Doctor Strange for fan service. And that makes me very upset. But I just don't think Pedro Pascal looks the part, but maybe he'll surprise me. I don't know if he can act the part, because it's just like I look at the I look at the 2004 Fantastic Four film from Tim Story and Ian Grafall. He was a fantastic Reed Richards. I loved him as Reed Richards, but I don't know. I mean, like I said, I think that Pedro Pascal is a great actor, and as I said, I think he would have been a much better Doctor Doom. But that's just me. But maybe they just didn't want to put his. Maybe he just didn't want to put his face behind another mask for his entire career. I don't know. But I mean, like, I don't know these other actors. I mean, I know Eddie from Stranger Things. I'm excited. I think he's going to be a great Johnny Storm. Um, but I don't watch The Bear. I haven't watched anything that Vanessa Kirby is in. But people who have watched the things that these actors are in like them. So I think that 3 out of the 4 of the Fantastic Four are going to be great. Although a lot of people are very upset for the casting of the Thing, because he's just going to be a CGI gigantic orange creature made of rock.
Yeah,
But you know what? From what I've heard, this guy has a fantastic Brooklyn accent in the show The Bear. So that's why I'm pretty sure they cast it, because that's Ben Grimm. That's the Thing.
yeah.
All I hope for is that eventually,
Bear's been sweeping the Emmys, so that
look,
show's been doing really, really well. So it makes sense to pull from.
all I'm saying is, if you're going to bring the Fantastic Four into this universe, you better make sure that the Thing and the Hulk have a fight. They have to fight, because
Oh,
that has been in so many comic books. The Hulk and the Thing have to have a battle. So I think the thing I'm a little bit more curious about is Pedro Pascal going to pull it off? That's my biggest concern. And more importantly, are the writers going to give us great movies with Marvel's first family? And how are they bringing them in? Because based on what I'm seeing here, is they were actually a superhero team in the 60s. They're saying that the movie's supposed to start taking place like in 1963, which would actually which would actually be very interesting to me, because they were created in 1961. So I don't know. But they just got it. Here's the thing: you got the Fantastic Four and you got the X-Men eventually coming into the MCU. And clearly, I will say that one of the most important things about the Fantastic Four being in here is that I don't know what they're going to do with Secret Wars, but I will tell you that 2 main characters in Secret Wars, the 2 that play the largest roles, are Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. So if you're not going to give me Captain America and Iron Man and Black Panther because they're big in Secret Wars and the source material, I'm telling you, if you ever had the energy to read Secret Wars or the entire Avengers line that led up to Secret Wars, it's a brilliant story. But look, I'm just hoping that Disney, I'm not even going to say Marvel, I'm going to say Disney. I'm hoping that they learned something from
yeah.
this past year and maybe even the year previous, because part of me thinks they are and part of me thinks they're not, because I'm not looking forward to an Agatha Harkness television show.
Yeah, I know that's supposed to be another one. I was like looking and I was like, what is even happening for Marvel this year? I was like, I don't even know. It looks like it's gonna be, yeah, a more quiet year. Yeah, I feel like they're really they have, again, like, they have so much they're introducing, and then they're like, let's do a show on Agatha. And it's like, what? With all the other stuff that we're throwing in the wall, like, it is just interesting as to like their
Yeah, and
direction.
it's like television shows are becoming movies now, and movies are possibly becoming television shows. It's like we're not even getting the Daredevil show this year, are we?
Yeah, no, because they, again, like, I feel like another big thing, like, again, is the SAG after strike just played such a huge role in Marvel and where it was going, because that halted production for a while, and the whole Daredevil show had to be scrapped. So they're reworking it. And I hope that it's going to be better than whatever it is they had before, because if they were mostly finished with it and they decided that none of it was usable, that really tells you something. So who knows what ends up happening there, but it looks like I have high hopes for the Daredevil show, because it looks like they're bringing back Foggy and they're bringing back Karen. So it's been fun getting to see some of the behind the scenes stuff that has been leaking, and getting to see those three characters back together. That's exciting. I'm psyched for that.
Yeah, and
I do
yeah,
have some concerns though about some of the actors that have been dropping out of some of the Marvel projects, and hearing some of those things. And I've been like, again, the way they announced the Fantastic Four, like, again, that's something that I would have expected with Marvel previously to be like something they announce at a Comic-Con or a D23 or something they make a really big deal. And just the Instagram post on Valentine's Day with like, here's the Fantastic Four, I was like, I'm a little bit concerned with the future of the MCU and where things are going, and that there's just not the hype and the excitement and the magic surrounding like all of these releases and getting people excited about them. It feels like everybody, even Marvel themselves, is collectively burned out. And I hope that there's a moment to like come to the table, evaluate, and be like, what is everything that we've done and we've introduced all the new characters, and look at where those pieces and everything comes together. Because even Blade is something like they announced
oh my
what, back in
goodness,
2019, and we're
yeah,
here how many years later with nada, and it was going to be a movie, then it was going to be a show, and then it's a poor Mahershala Ali, because he's also such a talented actor. And so it's
I
like, well,
love
what's
him.
going on over with Blade, because it felt like the Eternals tied a little bit to Blade. And so
What's
that's
going
it's been a moment.
what's going on with Shang-Chi? What's going on with the Turtles? Like all of these new movies that we've even gotten, like what is happening with these
Where do those
characters
come in
right
again?
now?
Yeah.
And where yeah, exactly. Like the problem, I think it's because of the fact that it was a mixture of the pandemic, the writer's strike, and everything else under the sun. It's just like Marvel just lost their footing entirely.
Yeah.
Well, you can't necessarily even say that either, because then you take a look at movies like Spider-Man No Way Home, and you take a look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volumes 3. Clearly, there's good stuff that they're still making.
Yeah,
And
but it
again,
feels like there's one visionary or a very specific, like, I think at Guardian 3 and I'm like, that's Gunn, like that's him taking his vision, executing it, and it's one person behind the wheel having their passion project and like going and doing it. And No Way Home was very much like, let's take all three Spider-Men and put them together. Let's bring all the Spider-Men together. It's an idea and a concept, and then taking it and executing it. And I think that's kind of what Marvel's lost. Like, you either need a director who knows the idea, knows the vision, knows what they want to execute, and you trust them to do that, or you have a very clear, concrete idea of like, this is the story that we want to tell, and here's what it is, and you take it and you do that. And I feel like they're just getting so lost in, we have to introduce this character in this thing, and the story becomes more about like, who are we introducing, what are we doing, trying to build, and trying to like, everything is for serving the purpose of something else down the line. And I think my advice to Marvel would be to like, or I guess just to wrap all this up, like, live in the present, focus on the characters you have now, tell their story, play with that. If you want to introduce a new character, great, but what is their immediate purpose? What purpose does it serve you to introduce them now? Where, if you're going to go somewhere with them, what is that going to be? How does that contribute to your bigger picture? I think it just makes so much more sense for Marvel to do what they've always done well, which is to do those more linear stories like they did with the first chapter, building everything up to the Infinity Saga, because I think it just makes it so much more palatable for the audience to follow. And I think there's still a way to introduce new characters, to bring in that flavor, to do things that are fun and out of the box, but also just make it easy and more palatable for your audience to follow, and to be able to then, bringing in all these new characters for them to have value being brought in. If you're going to bring in Hercules, bring him in and do something with that, and don't just like leave people hanging for years as to like, okay, we've introduced this character, and then by the time you finally come back around to them, it's been how many years, and people have even forgotten that this character's been introduced in the first place in an end credit scene, you know? It
Yeah.
just, you
So
need to
yeah,
come to the table and
I
clean up.
agree.
Really.
So to wrap it up, as you said, as you very
Yeah.
well said, it's just like we started this video talking about looking back to the glory days, and we're now in the first quarter of 2024. All of the movies except for Fantastic Four that were in the Phase 4 sizzle reel have officially been released. And it is crazy to believe how we were so hyped to get back to movie theaters, and now here we are. We just had this whole discussion. So I don't know what the future holds. I really don't, but I'm still going to hold out hope just because I just am excited for the next film, which is Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah.
But it better be great, because as of now, what the MCU has already offered us in 2024 was nothing special. Yeah. And I'm just hoping that this tradition will continue at the beginning of 2025, Gabby, and you and I will be back talking this again. Hopefully, we'll be talking a little bit more positively next time.
Yes, hopefully.
Because I think one of the most important things is the fact that you and I have been fans of this universe for many, many years. And I think it's really healthy for the fact that two people who are fans to reflect and actually be honest about our true attitudes. And basically, we're just two people that love the stuff, and we just want them to get back to what made it so special in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, again, like there is something that is so magical about superhero stories. There's the childhood nostalgia in it. It's the, you know, empowerment and rising on your own merits. It's the making sacrifices when it's not easy. Like there's human aspects to superhero stories that people really relate to. And there's a reason why Marvel was so successful in the first place, because they introduced these really compelling characters who, as much as they were superheroes, were also human and dealt with very human and real issues. And I think that it's been so lost in the spectacle and the building to something, and Marvel being bigger and better, and it's like focused on all the flashy stuff. And I think we've lost sight of like Marvel's lost sight of like what makes these stories really special and why people really like them and what it is about them like makes audiences care about them. And I think just going back to the drawing board and really like looking at what is the plan and how do all the characters fit in, and really just like sitting down and evaluating be something that would be super beneficial to them, because they're introducing so many exciting characters, and you have X-Men and you have Fantastic Four and you have Hercules. Like there's so many exciting and interesting characters that they've introduced and have to play with, and there's so much potential to do well and to do fun and exciting projects that could be done really, really well. But the effort and the attention to detail and the care needs to be put in there, and I feel like that's just kind of been gone. And audiences who care about these stories deserve better, and the actors who are putting in the time and energy into playing these characters deserve better. They deserve quality material to work with. And so I hope that there is that coming to the table and being like, what's working, what's not working, and sitting and having that conversation. Last thing I'll add is just that when the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strike was happening, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a show I love to pieces and will defend with my very heart. It was another one of the reasons why I was really bummed about Secret Invasion, because a lot of people were hoping for Daisy Johnson to show up again and for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to get its recognition in the MCU, as it rightfully deserves. Hasn't happened yet. Probably won't happen. I'm okay with it not happening. That show had a phenomenal 7 seasons, and I don't want the MCU to touch it with the way that things are going. Let it stay where it is. But that show did really, really well with the 7 seasons that it has. And so some of the writers were even talking about Instagram, and they were like, we did this. We did 7 seasons. We had a formula for making a show that was really successful and having a show Bible and having a team. And like, we did this, and there's no excuse for why the Disney Plus, like MCU shows, that whole, you know, rebranding of Marvel Television can't do that. We went and we did it and had the team behind that. So I think it's also like the behind the scenes too, and the attitude that they have towards the creating the shows, the team that they hire, the way that they look about the way that they're creating the projects, and what it is that people want. Because I think that's another thing with these shows. You get 6 episodes and then you're like done, and then it's move on to the next thing. And it is, you don't get to build the foundation with those characters and really get to know them and care about them with those 6 episodes. Granted, it's more than a 2-hour movie, but like still, when you have like, look at what Agents of Shield did, you have 7 seasons, you get to, build time with those characters, get to know them well, get to go on a journey with them. And so that by the time you get to the end, you feel like you've gone on that journey with them. And I feel like you've also lost that in the MCU. I feel like I don't feel like I'm going on the journey with the characters anymore. I feel like I'm seeing a piece of them and then they disappear, and then I come back to them and I'm like, what happened since then? Like, you're not spending the quality time with those characters. And that's what people love about the MCU and about some of their characters, is getting to really go on the journey with them. And I don't feel like that's happening as much anymore either.
Well, look, hopefully we'll get back together in the new year of 2025, and hopefully we'll have a much better attitude, and we'll have better things to say. But in the meantime, Gabby, thank you so much for taking the time to come back.
Yeah, we chatted a lot. It was great. It was definitely
Yeah.
a heated discussion.
Yeah, it was really interesting, the fact that we actually had a very long conversation, considering that we had so much smaller amounts of content to deal with, but that's not bad.
Yeah.
So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment. I'd love to talk to you. And there's going to be some more content on the way very, very soon. And that will be alongside this, my Marvels review. You'll probably see it before this. And hopefully I'll have some more positive things to say about these movies moving forward. But in the meantime, everybody, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. And we will see you in the next one.